Port Blossom shocker. A 19-year-old fell for her 58-year-old boss. The outcome was unthinkable. In a small forgotten fishing town on the drizzly coast of Maine, lived a young woman named Clara. Clara's mother had passed away when she was only 10, leaving her and her beloved father Frank to rely on each other. But 2 years ago, a sudden stroke had stolen Frank's health, leaving him bedridden. The entire weight of the family fell onto Clara's slender shoulders, not long before she had even turned 19. While her peers were excitedly preparing their college applications, Clara had to set aside her own dreams, determined to find work to care for her father. She never once cursed her fate. For her, simply seeing her father alive, seeing him smile, having a warm meal for him each day, that was the greatest happiness. Out of love for his daughter, Frank had often tearfully pleaded with her not to sacrifice her future for him. But Clara would just quietly bow her head, clasp his calloused hand, and whisper, "As long as you're alive, Dad, I have a path. I can always go back to school when you're better." A month later, through a recommendation from her cousin, Jessica, Clara was hired as a housekeeper at the Twilight Shore Hotel, a 3-story building near the coast of the bustling city of Port Blossom. The hotel wasn't as lavish as the high-end resorts, but it was clean and respectable, frequented by decent people. The owner, a man named Mr. Vance, around 58 years old, rarely made an appearance. He would occasionally stop by for a quick inspection, before quietly leaving again. Clara was always a diligent worker, never shying away from hard labor or complaining of fatigue. She greeted everyone with a gentle, polite smile, never getting involved in gossip or workplace squabbles. Once, a guest accidentally broke a blue crystal vase and blamed the staff. When the manager threatened to dock the entire shift's pay, it was Clara who stepped forward to take the blame, even though it wasn't her shift. That act earned her the respect of many at the hotel, but it also sowed the seeds of jealousy in a few others. On several occasions, Mr. Vance happened to walk by and see Clara hunched over, scrubbing the tile floors, or carefully smoothing a floral-patterned bedsheet. He would pause for a moment. At first, it was just a fleeting glance, but soon his gaze began to linger, though he never said a word to her, only offering a slight nod in silent acknowledgement. No one noticed, and no one could have guessed that these brief, accidental encounters were the beginning of a turbulent and stormy relationship. A 19-year-old girl, delicate, pure, and full of a desire to live, and a man nearing 60, experienced, lonely, and silent amidst the noisy rhythm of Port Blossom. No one would have ever imagined them in the same frame, but life is nothing if not unpredictable. An unexpected incident on a rainy night in May would send the fates of these two people in a direction that not even they could have foreseen. Early that morning, a thin mist still clung to the Maine air. Clara sat huddled on the bus from her small town to Port Blossom, her hands clutching a worn gray canvas backpack. Inside were only a few neatly folded sets of clothes, an old notebook filled with journal entries from the 9th grade, and a photograph of her father Frank, from before his illness. The bus hissed to a stop. She stepped out and gazed at the Port Blossom sea, a hazy blue in the early morning mist, small waves lapping gently against the stone embankment. The city was vast and unfamiliar, a world away from the familiar red dirt roads of her hometown. Clara felt a mix of excitement and the trembling fear of a girl who had never left her small village, now standing alone in the heart of a city. Her cousin Jessie met her at the station, dressed fashionably, her lips painted a bright, fiery red, the clicks of her high heels echoing on the pavement. Jessie didn't hug her, she just took the backpack and jutted her chin. "Let's go. The hotel is nearby. You start tomorrow. No time to mess around." Clara mumbled, "Yes, I know." Jessie was rooming with a friend, so Clara was given a small staff room at the end of the ground floor hallway. It was just big enough for an iron bed and an old wooden wardrobe. She didn't complain, only thanked her cousin profusely. To her, it was far cozier than the dilapidated shack she called home. On her first day, Clara was assigned 6 rooms. Pillows and cushions were in disarray, white towels were tossed on the floor, glasses were smeared with red lipstick, and the smell of cigarette smoke clung stubbornly to the sheer curtains. It took her nearly 3 hours to finish, her back aching and sweat dripping from her forehead. The manager walked by and sneered. "What took you so long?" You get 30 minutes per room, max. Any slower and it comes out of your pay. Clara lowered her head. I'm sorry. I'll try to be faster. Seeing this, Jessie just pursed her lips and walked away, clearly not wanting anyone to know they were related, afraid of being accused of nepotism. That evening, back in her small room, Clara sat with her knees drawn to her chest and called her father. On the other end, Frank's raspy voice asked, "Are you tired, honey? Are people treating you okay over there?" Clara forced a smile. "Everyone is very nice, Dad. I have to be at work early tomorrow. Remember to take your medicine on time." After hanging up, she placed the phone on her chest and stared up at the plain ceiling. She whispered to herself, "I have to do this. For Dad. For my future." In the following days, Clara grew accustomed to the work. She learned to distinguish the different types of cream-colored sheets, to sweep the floor diagonally for maximum efficiency, and to fold bath towels into the shape of pristine white lotus flowers, as the hotel required. Once, while mopping the floor, she happened to look up and meet the eyes of a man standing at the end of the hall. He wore a pale blue shirt and dark slacks, holding a small notebook. His face was kind, but his eyes were somber, as if they had seen countless years pass. She quickly lowered her head and greeted him. "Good morning, sir." The man merely gave a slight nod and walked past without a word. It was only later that Jessie whispered to her, "That's the owner, Mr. Vance. He rarely shows his face. Be careful not to get noticed by him." Clara just nodded, not daring to ask more. She had no idea that the fleeting glance in the hallway that day was the beginning of a powerful undercurrent in her life. In the eyes of many hotel employees, Mr. Vance was an enigma. No one knew what he liked or disliked, and no one dared to get too close or be too curious. He usually appeared only in the early morning or late afternoon, always carrying a dark blue notebook, walking at a leisurely pace, speaking little, and almost never smiling. Many staff members called him the ice-cold boss, because no matter who greeted him, he would only nod, rarely replying. Some had worked there for 2 years and had never been asked a single question by him. Clara heard these stories and tried even harder to keep her distance. Whenever Mr. Vance walked by, she would offer a polite bow and continue with her work. She didn't dare look at him for too long, wasn't curious, and certainly didn't try to strike up a conversation like some of the other young female employees who hoped to gain favor with the boss. But it was precisely her quiet focus that drew Mr. Vance's attention. One day, he entered a room to inspect it after a guest had checked out. It was a corner room on the second floor, often booked by international guests. Now, the bed was perfectly made, the glasses were sparkling clean, the towels were folded into the shape of a white chrysanthemum, and the floor carried the faint, pleasant scent of lemongrass. He stood in silence for a moment before quietly asking the manager, "Who cleaned this room?" The manager replied, "That would be the new girl, Clara. She's from the coast. Jessie recommended her." Mr. Vance said nothing more. But from that day on, he began to pay more attention to Clara. He maintained his cold demeanor, but his footsteps seemed to linger a little longer whenever he passed a room where Clara was working. One day, he saw her on her knees, cleaning under a bed, the back of her shirt soaked with sweat, her soft hair falling across her face. He stood there for a few seconds before turning away, unnoticed. One early morning, as Mr. Vance was passing the hotel's garage, he saw Clara sitting quietly in a corner, eating a dry piece of bread. Without calling her name or asking any questions, he glanced at her and then, a few moments later, returned and placed a warm container of oatmeal and a small carton of juice nearby. With it was a handwritten note on a small pink slip of paper, "Eat a full meal if you're starting early." Clara held the container, her eyes welling up. She looked around but saw no one. Only the note tucked under the lid. The handwriting was rounded and firm, exactly like the writing she had seen in the owner's inspection notebook. From that day forward, every morning, Clara would find a warm breakfast neatly placed in the corner of the garage. There was never a name, but she knew exactly who it was from. She kept this secret to herself, not telling anyone, not even Jessie. In her heart, Mr. Vance was like an elderly father, quietly caring for a daughter who had been starved of warmth and affection. One day, it rained heavily, and having forgotten her raincoat, She was soaked to the bone. Just as she got back to the hotel, before she could even get to her room to change, Mr. Vance came out of his office and saw her standing there, shivering from the cold. He didn't ask if she was okay, as most people would. He just walked past her. A moment later, he had someone bring her a thick windbreaker, along with a short note: "Change out of those wet clothes. You'll catch a cold." Mr. Vance still didn't smile, was still cold, and still used a nod in place of words. But Clara was beginning to understand that behind that stern exterior was a warm and lonely heart, lonely like him. And now, lonely like her. They still hadn't had a single proper conversation, but it seemed an invisible, fragile, and silent bond had begun to form between them, a bond that neither of them yet dared to name. From the warm breakfast sandwiches in the morning to the thick jacket on that rainy night, Clara began to feel a stirring in her heart. It wasn't the rushed infatuation of a young girl for a boy her age. The emotion she felt for Mr. Vance, a man nearly 40 years her senior, was a strange warmth, mingled with gratitude, appreciation, and something else she couldn't quite name. She continued to work as diligently as ever, but now her eyes had begun to follow his familiar silhouette. Every time Mr. Vance passed by, it was just a fleeting glance, a polite nod of her head, but she could feel a new softness in his gaze. Then, other small things began to happen. One time, the faucet in the staff room was leaking, dripping all night long. The next morning, when Clara opened the door, she found it had been fixed. Beside it was a note: "Fixed. Use with care." There was no signature, but Clara knew that handwriting all too well. Another day, she got a stomachache from eating instant noodles for 2 meals in a row. That evening, as she was curled up in her room, there was a knock on the door. It was the head cook, bringing her a steaming bowl of chicken noodle soup. The cook said that Mr. Different Minus Vance had asked her to bring it up. She added, "The boss said you've been looking very pale lately." Clara froze, her hands trembling as she accepted the bowl. It was the first time he had mentioned her to someone else. His concern was no longer silent, but purposeful and named, even if the words had not yet come from his own mouth. From that day on, the first stirrings of a new feeling began to blossom inside her, as gentle as the port blossom sea breeze on her shoulders, but enough to make the young woman's heart skip a beat. And from then on, Mr. Vance no longer avoided her. He still walked at the same slow pace, his eyes still calm, but if he saw her cleaning a room, he would stop and ask a simple question: "Are you tired today?" Or when he saw her carrying a heavy stack of bed linens, he wouldn't hesitate to roll up his sleeves and help, ignoring the curious stares of other employees. Clara never said much, only bowing her head in thanks. But inside, a quiet wave was lapping at her heart. Something was growing, gently but irresistibly. Still, both she and Mr. Vance knew the age gap between them was immense. The judgment of others would not be kind if their connection was discovered. So all these small acts of care were kept just subtle enough to warm a rainy day. Enough to make a person feel cherished, but not enough to cross the line of propriety and gossip. That night, a sudden storm rolled into Port Blossom, the fierce sea wind whipping at the hotel eaves. Rain slanted across the corridors, sending a chill down the spine. In her small room at the end of the hall, Clara was running a fever. Her body was burning up, her limbs weak from several late nights of working split shifts. She lay curled under the blanket, trying to sleep, but the drumming of rain on the tin roof made her head throb. The hotel was eerily quiet late at night, the wind whistling through the window cracks like a mournful cry. She touched her forehead. It was scalding. Her throat was parched and her stomach was painfully empty. She tried to sit up, intending to get some water, but as soon as she opened the door, a wave of dizziness hit her, and she collapsed onto the cold tile floor. Her head struck the edge of a wooden cabinet, leaving a small, bleeding scratch. Clara lay there, not crying or calling out, just whispering silently into the darkness, "Dad, I'm so tired." At that exact moment, a figure appeared in the hallway. It was Mr. Vance. He had a habit of inspecting the hotel late at night after heavy storms, checking for leaks or other issues. Seeing the staff room door ajar, An instinct made him pause. He froze when he saw Clara lying motionless on the floor. Her hair fanned out around her, blood trickling from her temple, her breathing faint. Without a moment's hesitation, he rushed in and scooped her up into his trembling arms. Clara. What's wrong? Her body was as hot as a burning coal. He hurried her up to his private room on the third floor. A place he had only used for resting during late nights at work for the past 10 years. He covered her with a blanket, placed a cold cloth on her forehead, and called a doctor he knew. Despite the storm, the doctor came and put her on an IV drip to bring the fever down. Mr. Vance sat silently by her bed, his eyes filled with worry. In that moment, his heart was stirred in a strange way. It wasn't pity, but a creeping fear of loss that coiled around his heart. Mr. Vance didn't leave the room for a second that night. He sat beside the bed, listening to the rain patter against the window pane, his hand periodically wiping the sweat from the young woman's brow with a cool cloth. His gaze was as pained as a father's, but it was also something more. At dawn, Clara's eyes fluttered open. Her surroundings were unfamiliar. The spacious room and the faint scent of sandalwood on the pillow confused her. When she turned her head, she saw Mr. Vance sitting beside her, his eyes dark with sleeplessness. She was stunned. "Sir, why am I here?" he replied softly, his voice hoarse. "You fainted in front of your room. I was lucky to be passing by." Clara's face flushed red. She tried to sit up quickly but collapsed back down. Dizzy. Mr. Vance caught her, his large hand touching her small shoulder. A quiet warmth passed between them, making her heart pound erratically. She mumbled, "I'm so sorry to have bothered you." "Sir." Mr. Vance just gave a slight smile. A very faint smile, but it was enough to make her feel as if something inside her had just bloomed. Like the first flower after a spring rain. After that eventful night, Clara was given 3 days of sick leave to recover. Mr. Vance himself signed the approval form, though he had never before interfered with the hotel's staffing schedules. The incident caused a stir among the staff. But because he was the owner, no one dared to ask questions. On the second day, Clara's fever was still low grade. Though she felt much better, she lay in the staff infirmary, her eyes gazing vaguely at the white ceiling, her heart in turmoil. No man had ever cared for her so meticulously. It wasn't because he was her boss. It was because he had sat by her side for an entire night, changed the cloth on her head, called a doctor, and even cooked porridge for her himself. The feeling inside her now was no longer just gratitude, but something soft and deep that had seeped into the bottom of her heart. It was the kind of feeling a 19-year-old girl who had never been in love was just beginning to understand. That afternoon, Mr. Vance came to visit her again. He carried a small fruit basket, a few cartons of milk, and a packet of nutritious oat porridge. He didn't say much, only asking if she felt better. Clara nodded meekly. "Yes, sir. I'm fine now. I can go back to work tomorrow." He looked at her for a moment before speaking slowly. "Come stay at my house for a few days. It's quieter there. More comfortable. It's too noisy here to rest properly." His words threw her into a state of utter confusion. Never in her life had she imagined setting foot in a man's private home, especially a man 40 years her senior. "Sir, I couldn't possibly. It wouldn't be appropriate." Mr. Vance looked at her, his eyes holding nothing but sincere concern. "I only see you as a young niece. If you're worried, I can arrange a separate room for you on the first floor. The door will always be locked. No one can bother you. I just want you to get well soon." His voice was deep and steady, filled with a reassuring strength. Clara looked at him for a long moment before giving a small nod. That evening, a light rain began to fall again. Mr. Vance's old silver car pulled up to the hotel entrance. He opened the passenger door for her as politely as a father would. Neither of them said much during the drive. There was only the gentle swish of the windshield wipers and the faint aroma of the hot jasmine tea he had brought with him. His house was on a small coastal road, about a 10-minute drive from the hotel. It was a modest, single-story house with a moss-green tiled roof, a red brick patio, and a trellis thick with honeysuckle covering the front gate. Clara was given a small fully furnished room on the ground floor. The bedding smelled of sunshine. There was a desk, a bookshelf, and a window that looked out onto a small loch. Verdant garden. Everything was as neat and tidy as the man himself. Mr. Vance stayed on the second floor, only coming down to bring her meals and medicine and to check on her briefly. There was never a single gesture that crossed a line. If you need anything, just call. I'll make you some fish soup after I get back from the market so you have a change of pace. Clara sat in her room, her heart a tangled mess, a strange warmth spreading through her chest. She had never truly known what it felt like to be protected. Now, in the middle of a cold port blossom rainy season, Mr. Vance had quietly given her real warmth, not the warmth of a rushed romance, but of a gentle, meaningful, and profound guardianship. And from that day on, her heart began to learn how to miss a man named Vance. 3 days passed in Mr. Vance's house, and Clara had almost fully recovered. The bruise on her forehead was fading, and her voice was clear again. But inside her, something was no longer the same. A sense of security, lightness, and an unnameable warmth had seeped into her every breath. That morning, she stepped out of her room and saw Mr. Vance sitting under the porch eaves, a teapot in his hand, his eyes fixed on the small garden filled with herbs and a few chili plants bearing bright red fruit. "Are you feeling all better?" he asked, his gaze still on the distance. "Yes, sir. I'm all better. I can go back to the hotel now." He turned to her and said gently, "Stay a few more days. You're still weak. The hotel is being taken care of. There's no need to rush." Clara mumbled, "But I feel like I'm imposing." He smiled a rare, genuine, and kind smile. "I'm not bothered. Why should you be?" That evening, for the first time in her life, Clara ate dinner with Mr. Vance under that simple roof. The meal was only 3 dishes. A simple soup, some pan-fried fish, and a plate of steamed vegetables. The food was not fancy, but the way he served her soup and placed small pieces of fish in her bowl made her heart tremble. "Go on. Eat. I may not look it, but I can cook quite a few things. You get used to it." Living alone. Clara smiled shyly, a strange emotion swelling inside her. Had any man ever sat across from her at such a warm, cozy meal before? Never. Every evening, Mr. Vance cooked dinner. Afterward, he would wash the dishes while she cleared the table and swept the floor. They didn't talk much, but the space between them was always filled with a serene peace. One night, during a downpour, the power suddenly went out. Clara, who had been reading, jumped at a loud clap of thunder. Mr. Vance came down from upstairs with 2 candles. "Are you afraid of thunder?" "Yes, sir. I have been since I was little. My heart starts pounding whenever I hear it." He placed a candle on the table and sat down next to her. "It's all right. I'm here." That simple sentence made her heart flutter violently. In the flickering candlelight, she stole a glance at him. His face was beaded with a light sweat. His hair was streaked with silver. And his eyes were calm but so very lonely. In the middle of a rainy night with no power, 2 people, one old and one young, sat together in the silent candlelight, while inside their hearts, 1,000 emotions churned like the sea. From that day on, their meals together were no longer just meals. They became an invisible thread connecting 2 hearts. Clara began to wait for him to come home for dinner. And Mr. Vance always cooked an extra dish that she liked, even though she had never mentioned it. These nameless acts of care, these unvoiced emotions, grew with each passing day, each shared meal, each silent glance they exchanged. That night, the sky was clear, and only the sound of insects chirping in the garden filled the air. Clara tossed and turned, unable to sleep, though her body had fully recovered. Something in her heart made it pound with a steady, heavy rhythm. It was a feeling unlike that for a father. Not just respect, but something new. A simmering tenderness that made her feel both happy and afraid. It was nearly 11 o'clock when Clara felt thirsty. She quietly stepped into the living room, intending to go to the kitchen for some water, but was surprised to see the light was still on. Mr. Vance was sitting there alone, lost in thought. "You're still awake?" Clara froze, then mumbled, "Yes, Sir, I was just getting some water. He nodded, then suddenly spoke. Clara, can you come sit for a moment? She hesitated for a few seconds before slowly walking over and sitting in the chair opposite him. After a long silence, Mr. Vance finally spoke. His voice low and soft. I care for you, Clara, more than a boss cares for an employee. And more than the concern between two strangers. But I understand that you are young. With your whole future ahead of you. While I am already nearing 60. Clara sat in silence. Tears suddenly welling in her eyes for reasons she couldn't explain. Mr. Vance looked at her gently. If one day you meet someone more suitable, I will not hold you back. But if you are not afraid, I only want to be by your side. To take care of you as I have these past few days. But with a clearer title. His proposal, as light as the wind, struck the heart of the 19-year-old girl with the force of a tidal wave. A heart already tangled in the first complex emotions of her life. Clara's voice was choked. Mr. Vance. He smiled and held out his hand. Though he didn't touch her. You don't have to answer right away. Just know that my feelings are sincere. I can wait. After Mr. Vance's heartfelt confession, Clara's world was turned upside down. She no longer slept soundly, her mind constantly circling back to his eyes, his deep voice, and the words that made her heart ache with emotion. My feelings are sincere, 3 words that seemed so light yet weighed on her small heart like the entire sky. For the next few days, Clara became noticeably quieter. Though Mr. Vance behaved as usual, still cooking, still saving her favorite pan-seared fish, still asking if she felt completely well. They both implicitly understood that the space between them had changed. It was no longer the relationship of a boss and an employee, nor simply the protection of an elder for someone more vulnerable. It was something new, budding but not yet daring to be named. That afternoon, Clara asked Mr. Vance for permission to go for a walk. She strolled along the seawall to an old stone bench, a place she used to sit with her mother and eat ice cream when she was a little girl. Now, she was alone with a confusion no one could possibly understand. Clara looked up at the windless sky and wondered if anyone could comprehend what she was feeling. On one hand, there was Mr. Vance, an experienced, kind man who had quietly given her the feeling of being loved and protected. On the other, there were the whispers of society, the judgment in people's eyes if they knew. They would call her a gold digger, shameless, a girl with no decency. She was scared of being misunderstood, scared that she herself didn't know what she was feeling. But if there were no feelings, why did her heart tremble every time she looked at him? When she returned that evening, Mr. Vance was still in the kitchen, cooking. She stepped inside and said softly, "Let me help you." He turned and smiled. "Go sit down and rest. I'm almost finished." She looked at him for a long moment, then bowed her head. "Mr. Vance, I still don't know how to answer you." He paused but didn't turn around. His voice remained steady. "I'm not rushing you. I just need you to think carefully. You can't force feelings. If they aren't there, then we can pretend that conversation never happened." Clara clenched her fists. "But what if I feel the same way you do?" Mr. Vance froze. He turned to face her, his eyes as gentle as a calm sea. "Then I will wait for you to say it. Whenever you're ready." Clara said nothing more. But that night, she brewed a pot of chamomile tea herself, placed it on the table, and quietly poured him a cup before heading to her room. It was her answer. Hesitant and shy, but it was clear she was not refusing him. Everything might have remained peaceful if not for what happened the next morning. Clara returned to work at the hotel, fully recovered and in better spirits. But she was not prepared for the fact that things had changed. The moment she stepped into the administrative area, the first glance she received from Brenda, a longtime receptionist, was not a familiar one, but a quick, dismissive look, followed by a purse of the lips. A little later, in the staff break room, as Clara entered to change into her uniform, she overheard hushed words cutting through the hum of the fan. Got a whole week off and still kept her job. Even got the easiest shift. What a life for a 19-year-old with a benefactor looking out for her. It's so obvious. Clara stopped in her tracks. A bitter taste in her throat. No one said her name. But she knew who they were talking about. Mr. Vance's kindness. The meals Head brought to the hotel for her. The subtle favoritism Head shown her, it had all been noticed and woven into a malicious narrative. That afternoon, when Mr. Vance came to inspect the floors, two young employees who had been chatting immediately fell silent as he stepped out of the elevator. He said nothing, but he understood. When he returned home, he called Clara up to the hotel's rooftop, a place few people went. "Has anyone said anything to you?" he asked, his expression serious. Clara shook her head. "It's nothing, sir. I'm used to it." He looked at her for a long time, then said gently, "I'm sorry. My concern for you has caused people to gossip." Clara gave a small smile, her voice soft. "But I don't want you to stop." Mr. Vance was taken aback. Her words weren't a declaration of love, but they struck his heart with a feeling that was a mix of sorrow, warmth, and deep affection. He clenched his hand slightly. "I will handle this. You won't have to hear another word." That evening, he called a meeting with the management team. He didn't raise his voice or interrogate anyone, but his warning was clear. From now on, anyone caught spreading baseless rumors that affect another employee will face disciplinary action. We are in the service industry. Our words should not carry malice. The brief warning was enough to silence the hotel, but even if they were quiet on the surface, people's minds were still filled with suspicion. The more it was forbidden, the more they believed something sordid was happening between the owner and the 19-year-old girl. And some were no longer content with just looks and whispers. They began to act. One evening, the night receptionist reported to the manager that a guest in room 305 claimed a leather wallet containing foreign currency was missing. This was a room Clara had been in charge of cleaning that morning. Immediately, management ordered a review of the security cameras and a search of the personal belongings of all relevant staff. Clara was called in to give a statement. She was stunned and flustered. I just cleaned the room according to procedure. I never touched the guests' belongings." Another staff member commented airily, "If you didn't touch it, how did it go missing? Who else was in that room besides you?" A few others began to look on with feigned concern, but their tone implied she was already guilty. The news reached Mr. Vance quickly. He immediately demanded a full review of the keycard access history for the room, the hallway camera footage, and reported the incident to the local police to avoid any vague internal handling of the matter. That night, he found Clara in the staff break room. She was huddled in a chair, her eyes red and swollen. She wasn't crying, but it was clear she had endured immense humiliation. "I know you didn't do it," he said firmly. "I trust you." Clara looked up, her lips pressed into a thin line. "But they don't. They were just waiting for something to happen to push me out. I know it." Mr. Vance looked at her, his eyes filled with pain for her. He stepped forward and placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are not alone. I will get to the bottom of this. If someone is trying to frame you, they will pay the price." At just those words, Clara burst into tears. All the emotion she had been holding back for days finally came pouring out. The next morning, the results of the police investigation left the entire hotel speechless. The security camera in the third-floor hallway had recorded the night receptionist, the very person who had reported the theft, sneaking into room 305 at nearly 11 p.m. when the guest was out and the door had not been properly latched. A search of her personal locker revealed the missing wallet. Faced with undeniable evidence, she bowed her head, unable to say a word. The rumor was that she had been jealous of Clara, a young and beautiful girl who had caught the owner's eye, and had deliberately framed her to get her fired in disgrace. When the truth came out, a sudden silence fell over the hotel. The sidelong glances and the whispered rumors vanished. But for Clara, the wound in her heart remained. The only difference was, this time, she was no longer afraid, because she had someone by her side who would always believe in her and stand ready to protect her from any storm. After the false accusation, Mr. Vance gave Clara another 3 days off to collect herself. Though her name had been cleared, her heart was still heavy. The pain of being suspected, of the judgmental stares, Of the casual words that cut like sharp knives, it all still lingered in her sad eyes. She stayed at the small coastal house, which no longer felt strange but like a true sanctuary. Mr. Vance still kept a respectful distance. Still cooked for her as before. Still asked how she was doing. But he never once brought up the topic of their feelings again. He understood that she needed time. And he was patient enough to wait. That afternoon, the sun softened. Clara sat on the stone bench in the yard, holding an old book as the gentle golden light fell on her shoulders, making her face seem all the more delicate. Mr. Vance stepped out of the house with a glass of lemonade. "Drink this to cool down. I just made it." Clara took it and said softly, "Thank you, sir." They sat in a comfortable silence as the cicadas began their evening song in the honeysuckle vines. After a moment, Clara spoke quietly. "Mr. Vance, the other day, you said you didn't want me to suffer any more pain. Is that true?" He gave a small nod. "Yes. Because you've already been through too much. I don't want to see a good person dragged down by ugliness." Clara looked directly into his eyes for the first time in days. Her gaze steady. Her voice was slow and gentle, but full of resolve. "Then, if I choose you, is that okay?" He was stunned. Her words were like a cool breeze that blew away all the doubt and hesitation that had been weighing on his heart for so long. "Are you sure?" Clara nodded, her eyes turning red. But a smile remained on her lips. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know that no one has ever made me feel like myself the way you do. I'm not afraid anymore. Not if you're the one holding my hand." Mr. Vance didn't speak. He just reached out his hand. Slowly. Full of reverence. It was a hand weathered and calloused by the years. Yet it trembled like that of a young boy. Clara placed her hand in his L. For the first time. They held hands. It was a silent, unhurried, gentle touch. But it was incredibly warm and certain. Clara rested her face on his shoulder and whispered like the wind, "Please don't ever let go of my hand." He squeezed her hand gently. His voice deep and warm. "I will never let go. As long as you still want to hold on." The sky was clear that afternoon. But a strange, new wind had just blown through their hearts, sweeping away all fear and hesitation, leaving behind a tender, honest feeling that could finally be called love. After that moment, Clara and Mr. Vance didn't make anything public. They maintained their quiet, slow-paced life, with the only difference being the new layer of trust and understanding in their eyes. However, what can be hidden from the eyes of strangers is much harder to hide from family, and the moment Clara wasn't prepared for finally arrived. On Saturday afternoon, she took a bus back to her hometown to visit her father. Since her mother's death and Frank's debilitating stroke, he was the last remaining pillar in her life. The moment she stepped into the house, she saw her distant aunt, Patty, sitting by her father's bed, her voice dripping with acid. "I'm telling you, Frank, it's a waste of a lifetime for a pretty young girl like yours to get mixed up with that old Vance fellow." Clara froze. Before she could react, Aunt Patty turned to her and sneered. "The news is all over town. Everyone's saying she quit her job and has been living in his house for nearly 2 weeks. I even heard he's planning to marry her." My God. A 19-year-old girl marrying a man nearly 60. People don't call that love. Sweetie. Clara clenched her fists. She looked at her father. Frank was struggling to sit up. His face flushed red, his hands trembling. "Is it true, Clara?" She bowed her head. Her voice choked. "Dad, I haven't done anything wrong. I know Mr. Vance is older. But he is kind and sincere. And I truly care for him." "Care?" Frank roared, his voice hoarse with weakness. "You call that caring? When someone gives you a meal, you show gratitude. But you also have to know your place. Do you dare bring shame on us? Selling your dignity for a place to stay while I'm still alive?" Clara burst into tears. "It's not like that, Dad. I don't want his money or his status. I just want to be with someone I can trust. I'm so tired. Dad." Frank slammed his hand on the bed. "I will not accept it. If you keep seeing that man, don't call me your father anymore." Clara went numb. She never thought the father who had loved her most could say something so painful. But she also understood he was hurt, believing his daughter was being deceived. He couldn't understand what she had been through. She silently walked out of the house, Aunt Patty's final words chasing after her. If you really marry him, don't ever expect to come back to this house. This town will look down on you for the rest of your life. Child. On the bus back to the city, Clara rested her head against the window, tears falling silently. The wind whipped through her tangled hair. She had no idea how she was supposed to move forward, now that even her own father had turned his back on the love she had chosen. It was late when she got back to the house. The coastal city of Port Blossom was unusually quiet, with only the sound of the waves seeming to soothe her heavy footsteps. As she opened the gate, she saw a light on in the living room. Mr. Vance was sitting there, with his familiar quiet presence. On the table were 2 cups of steaming tea, a freshly brewed pot between them. Seeing her, he only asked softly, "You're back. Have you eaten?" Clara didn't answer. She walked slowly into the house, her eyes red and still damp with tears. Then, suddenly, she rushed into his arms like a child who had lost her mother, hugging him tightly and sobbing uncontrollably. Mr. Vance didn't ask any more questions or offer any words of comfort. He just stood there silently, holding her tightly, his hand gently rubbing her back, as if to say, "I'm here. I'll always be here." After a while, Clara mumbled, "My father, he disowned me." "Sir." He nodded slightly. "I suspected as much. For a man his age, it's very difficult to accept his daughter loving someone nearly his own age." Her voice was thick. "I don't blame him. I'm just sad that even my own family doesn't believe that my love can be real." Mr. Vance was thoughtful for a moment, then stood up and went into his study. He returned a moment later with an old brown passbook. "This is a savings account I started after my wife passed away. I put a little in each month. With no real plan. I figured if I was old and alone, I'd use it for a nursing home." Clara's eyes widened. He handed the book to her. "But now, I have you. If you still want to leave, I will give you all of this. This house, too. I'll sell it if I have to. You can start over somewhere else." "And what about you?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. He smiled, a strange gentleness in his eyes. "I'll stay behind, because I know that true love can't be forced. If I'm the only one who believes in it, what's the point of keeping you here?" Clara was silent. She looked at the bank book, then at the man before her, a man willing to let her go, just so she could live the life she chose. He wasn't crying, wasn't blaming, wasn't clinging, yet he made her heart ache with an almost unbearable pain. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. "I'm staying. Not for this house or that bank book, but for you." Mr. Vance froze, and for the first time, his eyes grew misty. Clara stepped forward and took his hand. "I don't want to run anymore. If people don't understand, let them talk. All that matters is that you believe me, and that I believe this love is real." For the first time, Mr. Vance didn't hide his emotions. He pulled her into his arms and held her tight. The cold emptiness he had felt for so many years was suddenly filled with the warmth of a rising flame. After that night, Clara no longer hid her feelings for Mr. Vance. Though they weren't public, their every glance and gesture was filled with understanding and trust. She returned to work at the hotel. Mr. Vance became even more discreet, making fewer appearances and observing from a distance to avoid giving the staff more reason to talk. But what was bound to happen, happened. A middle-aged man named Mr. Peterson, the hotel's general manager who had worked with Mr. Vance for 15 years and was his only close friend, began to take notice. One morning, passing by Mr. Vance's house by chance, he saw Clara stepping out the front door with a bag of trash, her face free of makeup, her hair still damp from a shower. He said nothing, just frowned slightly and quietly turned away. The next day, during an internal meeting, Mr. Peterson asked bluntly, "Vance, is it true you're involved with the girl?" Clara. Mr. Vance was silent for a few seconds before nodding. "It's true." Mr. Peterson's face was etched with worry. "Have you thought this through? She's the same age as my granddaughter. Outsiders won't understand. They'll just point and snicker. And it's not just them. The whispers have already started up again here at the hotel. Mr. Vance sighed. I know all that. But I've lived this long. Peterson. I no longer have time to live for the opinions of others. I live for my conscience. For what I believe is right. Mr. Peterson was still not convinced. And what about the girl? She's only 19. Her whole life is ahead of her. What if she regrets it later? And what about you? Can you handle being hurt again? The question made Mr. Vance pause. Then he gave a faint, humorless smile. If she ever regrets it, I'll be the first to let her go. But right now, I don't want to leave her to face this alone. And I believe in my choice. That afternoon, Clara was called into Mr. Peterson's office. He looked at the young woman before him, slender, but with a resolute look in her eyes. Do you know that I'm an old friend of Mr. Vance's? Yes. Sir. I know. Then do you understand that if the rumors about you two get any bigger, it will affect not only him, but this entire hotel? Clara gave a small nod. I understand, sir. And I don't want my personal matters to make anyone uncomfortable. Then are you willing to step back? Clara bit her lip, but her voice remained steady. I have thought about it. But then I realized that if I leave now, I would be hurting someone who has already sacrificed so much for me. I don't live for my reputation. I live for my heart. Mr. Peterson was silent. He never imagined a young woman like her could have such a resilient heart. All right. Then. I won't stand in your way. But remember, a love that isn't strong enough will break on its own. Take it one slow step at a time. So that no matter what happens later, you won't have any regrets. Clara bowed her head slightly. Thank you, sir. A few days later, Clara felt a strange shift within her. Sudden waves of nausea, a deep fatigue, a constant desire for sleep, and occasional dizziness. It all made her begin to suspect. That evening, after her shift, Clara walked to a pharmacy at the end of the street and discreetly bought a pregnancy test. Her hand trembled as she held the tiny object, stuffing it deep into her coat pocket and practically running back to Mr. Vance's house. She waited until he had gone up to his room to rest before she tiptoed into the bathroom. Her heart hammered against her ribs, her hands icy with nervousness. The 3-minute wait felt like a century. And then, the second line appeared. Stark and red. Clara froze, the world tilting on its axis. She gripped the edge of the sink, sinking to the cold tile floor. Her mind a complete blank, hearing only the frantic drumming of her own heart. Pregnant. Impregnant. She couldn't sleep a wink that night. Her eyes stared at the ceiling. 1,000 questions racing through her mind. What should she do? Should she keep the baby? If she did, would she be brave enough to face the world? The next morning, Clara left the house early. She didn't go to work. She found a small, quiet private clinic to get an ultrasound. The doctor confirmed the pregnancy was a little over 5 weeks along. A heartbeat had already begun to form. When she heard the tiny, steady rhythm pulsing through the ultrasound machine's speaker, Clara burst into tears. It was a strange feeling: panic, emotion, fear, but also an unwillingness to let go. She stood before the door to Mr. Vance's house for a long time that afternoon. Inside, he was tidying the garden, his expression as peaceful as always. But her heart was no longer peaceful. Sir, I need to talk to you, she said, her voice clear. He turned, saw her pale face, and his own filled with concern. Are you feeling unwell? Come inside and rest. No. I need to talk to you about something serious. They sat across from each other in the living room. Clara took the pregnancy test from her pocket and placed it on the table. Her eyes were red, but she didn't look away. Impregnant. It's yours. Mr. Vance froze, his entire body going rigid for a few seconds. His face went pale, his eyes wide as he slowly lowered his gaze to the small plastic stick on the table. Are you sure? Clara nodded, tears welling up. I had an ultrasound this morning. It's been over 5 weeks. Silence fell. After a long moment, Mr. Vance stood and walked slowly to the window. looking out at the garden where the flowers were in full bloom. I didn't think things would happen this fast. Clara bowed her head. Her voice choked. If you're not ready, I can take care of it myself. I won't blame you. But he turned back. His own eyes now red. His voice low. Do you think I'm that kind of man? If it's your child, then it's my child. And I will do everything. But I'm scared. Clara. I'm scared for you. I'm scared of what the world will say that you accepted being a single mother at 19 because of money. Clara looked at him. Tears streaming down her face. I'm only scared that you'll regret it. Mr. Vance came to her, gently took her hand, and placed it on his chest. Listen. My heart is still beating, and it's because of you. And if this baby is the result of our love, then even if the whole world turns its back, I will stand by your side. Clara broke down, truly sobbing in his arms for the first time. The sound of the waves crashing on the shore felt like a quiet blessing. A tiny new life had arrived, bringing with it a storm of challenges. But it was also the light that made two lost people grip each other's hands once more, ready to step forward with faith. Within a week, the news that Clara was pregnant spread through the hotel like wildfire. 19, barely here, and already knocked up by the boss. I hear. God. He's old enough to be her father. What's he even thinking? The vicious comments echoed everywhere. Everyone knew. But no one dared say it to their faces. They just whispered. Intentionally loud enough for Clara to hear. Her body began to change. She was tired. Dizzy. With no appetite and restless nights. But what hurt more than any of it were the stares, the probing, judgmental looks. As if she were a criminal. One morning, while Mr. Vance was in a meeting with management, a senior employee named Ms. Albright suddenly spoke up. I'm sorry, sir, but if the hotel allows Ms. Clara to continue working in her condition, it will be very difficult to maintain our reputation. Who would want her interacting with international guests while her belly is growing? The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mr. Peterson, Mr. Vance's friend, shot him a worried look. Mr. Vance sat in silence for a moment, then slowly stood up. Thank you all for your candor. I know this is not easy to accept, but I will confirm that the child is mine. And I will take full responsibility. The room was silent. I don't expect your support. I only ask that you understand that I am not forcing anyone to share this burden. Ms. Clara will be taking a leave of absence starting next week. Her salary and benefits will continue until she makes a formal decision after the birth. That afternoon, Mr. Vance sat alone in his office for hours. When he came home, Clara was waiting for him on the porch. When she saw him, she stood up to speak, but he gently held up a hand. I've taken care of it. Just stay home and rest. Clara looked at him, a lump in her throat. I'm sorry that I've caused you to face so much criticism. Mr. Vance smiled. A tired but sincere smile. People say I'm an old fool. I'm not angry at them. I'm just angry that even now, people still don't understand what love is. One afternoon in June, under a blazing sun, Clara was resting when she heard frantic knocking. She opened the door and froze. It was her father, Frank. He was shockingly thin, his face gaunt, leaning on a cane with a neighbor helping him stand. The moment he saw Clara, he glared. So you still know how to open a door? Clara was speechless. Dad, please, come inside. He pushed past her. The moment he sat down, he said, I came to see with my own eyes if you have any shame left. He looked around the room. Then his eyes narrowed. You're really living with him? Yes, she whispered. You're really pregnant? Yes. It's his child? Yes. Clara's three quiet but firm answers silenced him. After a moment, he slammed his cane on the floor. You are such a fool. My girl. You haven't even lived your own life yet. And you're already becoming a mother, with an old man at that. Clara lifted her head, looking at her father for a long time. Dad, when Mom married you, you were a poor, sickly man with no one's support. But she still chose you. Because she believed in her heart. I'm doing the same. I know I've chosen a difficult path, but I haven't chosen the wrong one. Frank was at a loss for words. After a moment, he said quietly, "The doctor told me. I probably only have a few months left. My liver can't take it anymore. I just want to see my grandchild's face once before I close my eyes." Clara was devastated, her whole body trembling. "Dad, why didn't you tell me sooner? How could I? I thought you had chosen to live with him and forgotten all about us. But yesterday, Aunt Patty told me you're still sending money and medicine. That you've arranged for someone to care for me. I know you haven't forgotten." Clara burst into tears and threw her arms around her father. Frank tried to maintain his stern facade, but his own tears fell silently onto her shoulder. After that visit, the relationship between Frank and his daughter began to soften. Though he still had his doubts, he was no longer so harsh. Love, worry, and the call of family had helped him learn to accept. One evening, as the sun set over the Port Blossom beach, Frank sat with Mr. Vance on the porch, drinking tea. The sky was a fiery red. Frank spoke suddenly. "I think you two should have a small wedding. Nothing fancy. Just the people who truly care about you. So my grandchild isn't born into a world where people call them fatherless." Mr. Vance was stunned. After a long moment, he nodded slowly, his voice low. I never dared to dream of a wedding. Just being able to live by Clara's side each day is more than enough for me. But if her father asks it of me, then I will gladly accept." When Clara heard what her father had said, she cried like a child. She never imagined that the man who had disowned her would now be the one to suggest her marriage. In that moment, her father was not just her father, but her greatest pillar of support, the great old tree that had sheltered her life once more. The wedding was as simple as everyone had wished. There was no grand hall, no extravagant floral arrangements, no magnificent bridal gown. There was only a small garden in the yard, a few rustic wooden tables set under the honeysuckle trellis, strings of golden lights hung gently overhead, a handful of close friends, and the quiet descent of twilight. Clara wore a simple white dress, her hair falling softly over her shoulders, her hands holding a bouquet of white calla lilies. Mr. Vance waited for her at the end of the gravel path. His pale gray suit made him look both rugged and warm. As Clara approached, her step slow but sure, their eyes met as they had 1,000 times before. But this time, it was under the watchful gaze of witnesses. Amidst the silent faith and blessings of family and friends, people who had once objected, who had once doubted, but who had finally come to accept. Her father, Frank, officiated the ceremony. His hand trembled slightly as he gave his daughter's hand to Mr. Vance, but his eyes shone with a strange brightness. "Today, I give you my daughter, not as a debt, but as a gift. I ask that you cherish her as the last great treasure of my life." Mr. Vance bowed his head deeply. "I am grateful to you, Frank. For the rest of my life, I will not fail you." Applause broke out. A light breeze carried the gentle scent of honeysuckle, illuminating Clara's face, which was glistening with happy tears. There was no grand carriage, no celebratory fireworks, but it was the most beautiful wedding in her life. Because it held forgiveness, it held faith, and it held a love big enough to overcome everything. Time passed more quickly than Clara could have imagined. After the small wedding in the garden, everything seemed to settle. Public opinion began to soften. Mr. Vance stepped back from his active role, handing over the main operations of the hotel to Mr. Peterson. Clara stopped working entirely, spending her days at home, resting and waiting for the baby's arrival. Her belly grew bigger each day. 8 months passed. Though she was tired, her face radiated a rare and profound peace. Mr. Vance cherished her, tending to her every meal and her rest. Every night, he would place his hand on her belly, listening to the baby kick, and smile like a child. "Our baby is so active. It must be a boy," he would often tease. Clara would laugh. "Boy or girl, it doesn't matter. As long as they're healthy, and with a father like you, they're sure to be a very good baby." It seemed their life would continue on this peaceful course forever. But then, disaster struck on a stormy night. It was the first of the month, and rain had been pouring down since the afternoon. Thunder and lightning shook the coast, Around midnight, Clara was suddenly seized by a violent pain in her abdomen. It wasn't a stomachache. It felt as if someone was wringing her insides. Vance. Vance. It hurt so much. She called out over the sound of the rain hammering on the roof. Mr. Vance awoke with a start and rushed to hold her. Seeing her pale face and bluish lips, he panicked. This isn't right. We have to get you to the hospital. Now. But the storm was too severe. The waves were high. And the road to the city center was blocked by a fallen tree. He frantically called for an ambulance but was told it would be at least a 30-minute wait. Clara's pain was getting worse. Her body contorting on the bed. Her breaths coming in ragged gasps. He couldn't wait any longer. Mr. Vance threw on a raincoat, lifted his wife into his arms, and carried her out to his old motorcycle, covering her with a tarp to shield her from the rain, with one hand on the handlebars and the other holding his wife, who was writhing in agony behind him. He sped into the storm. The road was slick. The wind was fierce. But he didn't stop. At an intersection near the center of town, the motorcycle skidded and crashed as the back wheel plunged into a large pothole. He fell hard on his arm, blood pouring from a gash. But he scrambled to his feet, hoisted his wife onto his back, and began walking the rest of the way to the small local clinic. The nurse on the night shift turned pale at the sight of them. My God! Why didn't you call an ambulance? There wasn't time. He rasped, his body shaking from cold, worry, and exhaustion. Please. Save my wife. Save my child. Around 3 in the morning, the sound of a baby's cry echoed clear and strong through the silent hallway, piercing the heart of the man who sat clutching his chest, struggling to breathe. It's a girl, the nurse said, a kind smile on her face. Mother and daughter are both doing well. Mr. Vance burst into tears. He no longer had the strength to feel joy, only a profound relief that left him sitting limply in the chair, his eyes glistening with happy tears. Clara was brought out, her face pale but her lips curved into a weak smile. Looking at him, she said, I'm sorry for scaring you. He took her hand and gently kissed it. I'm the one who's sorry I couldn't give you a more peaceful birth. But you know, she has a very strong cry. She's just like you, strong, resilient, and brave. Outside, the rain was still falling. But inside their hearts, there was peace. 3 months after their daughter was born, a life for Clara and Mr. Vance settled into a stable rhythm. The baby was named Annie, with the hope that she would have a life of peace and freedom. She had her mother's round, dark eyes, skin as white as milk, and she especially loved to listen to the sound of the waves each morning. Clara nursed her. Whenever the baby cried, all it took was for Mr. Vance to pick her up, pat her back, and hum a few lines from an old folk song, and she would quiet down immediately. She must love my voice, he would often say, his eyes shining like a young grandfather's. Though he was over 60, Mr. Vance spent every morning giving his daughter a sunbath, tending to the plants in the garden, and quietly writing in his journal. The words were carefully written in a blue, leather-bound notebook, his script slanted, a little shaky in places. To my dearest daughter, if one day you grow up and wonder why your father is so much older than the fathers of your friends, I want you to read this. In here, I will not only tell you the story of your mother's love, a 19-year-old girl full of courage, but also the journey of your father's heart, a man who thought he no longer knew how to love, who no longer dared to hope, until your mother appeared. Clara happened to find the journal one afternoon while folding laundry. She read, and with every page, she cried. She never imagined that quiet, reserved man possessed such a deep and emotional soul. He didn't write about the hardships she had endured, didn't complain about the gossip, and never mentioned the pain of the past. He simply recounted everything like a father writing a letter to his daughter, with all his love and gratitude. When did you start writing this? She asked him. The day she first kicked inside you. He smiled. I want her to know, long after I'm gone, just how much her father loved her mother. Clara threw her arms around him, unable to say anything more. His love was not loud or fierce, but it was enduring and quiet, like the sound of the sea itself. That love had nurtured her, and now, it was sheltering her daughter. 3 years later, the Twilight Shore Hotel had become a beloved destination for many travelers, not just for the beautiful scenery, but for the true love story that lived there. People told each other about the hotel owner who had married a woman nearly 40 years his junior, and how they lived a life of extraordinary happiness. There were no more whispers, no more sneers. Because over the years, people had witnessed a real family, a place where a young wife cared devotedly for her husband and raised her child, and where an old father sunbathed with his daughter, fed her, and changed her diapers with the joy of a young man. One evening, Mr. Vance sat on the porch, quietly watching Clara. She knew that you don't need a castle. You don't need a vow to move mountains. You just need someone who dares to hold your hand through the storm and keeps that promise every single day. That is enough for a lifetime of peace. Some destinies seem impossible, yet they blossom in the most unexpected of circumstances. The story of Clara and Mr. Vance wasn't just about the love between a 19-year-old girl and a man nearing 60. It was the brave journey of two souls who overcame all prejudice to find each other, and together, built a true family. Thank you all for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. Your support means the world to us.